Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to the first filibuster of 1984. What a year you have to look forward to. There's a Ghostbusters movie coming out, we're going to get a big screen adaptation of sci-fi classic Dune, and people are going crazy for something called The Karate Kid in Ralph Macchio. Plus, this is a year that we start to live in an Orwellian dystopian society where Big Brother is always watching. Just kidding, it's 2021, and to continue the Big Brother analogy, we're on day 268 of lockdown. I'm your co-host, Alice King, and with me as always is Lee Hutchison. How are you?
Yeah, it's good to be back. Still in lockdown, but still watching movies and talking about movies. Some things don't change.
Exactly. So before we dive into today's topic, a little bit of housekeeping. Long-time listeners will know that despite being on lockdown since March of last year and a severe lack of content, I hate that word, but that's where we are these days, we still managed to drop a new episode of Filibuster every single week in 2020, sometimes with rather tenuous topics being discussed. So with the cinematic outlook in the UK looking pretty bleak until at least April, but let's face it, it will probably be longer, we've made the decision to move to a fortnightly schedule until cinemas are reopened and we have lots of new films to discuss. That way that we have fewer episodes, but hopefully each one will be packed with some fantastic content. We'll also have our sister podcast, the 24 Project, which is currently running weekly thanks to Lee knocking out the park with all his great interviews. And then we'll continue reviewing TV content until it's time for A24 to finally get some films back in the cinema. We'll have Minari in February, hopefully Zola in June, and then The Green Knight finally in July to look forward to. But for now, I'm ready to throw the lasso of truth around Lee, and it's time to find out exactly what we thought of Wonder Woman 1984. The current discourse, because there is always a discourse, and then whether or not our opinions were influenced by the format in which we watched it on. So Wonder Woman in 1984 sees Diana Prince living quietly among mortals in the vibrant, sleek 1980s, an era of excess driven by the pursuit of having it all. Though she comes into her full powers, she maintains a low profile by curating ancient artifacts and only performing heroic acts incognito. But soon Diana will have to muster all of her strength, wisdom and courage as she finds herself squaring off against Maxwell Lord and the Cheetah, a villainess who possesses superhuman strength and agility. It's directed by Patty Jenkins again and stars Gal Gadot, Chris Pine, Kristen Wiig and Pedro Pascal. So, Lee, were you looking forward to Wonder Woman 1984?
Not really, but it's one of those ones I was kind of looking forward to seeing it in the cinema. I was, before sort of the lockdown kind of kicked in again, I was due to travel up to your neck of the woods in Aberdeen for a Christmas break, and I love being able to go to the cinema on like Christmas Eve and then on sort of Boxing Day to see something brand new, and usually on sort of Christmas Eve to see a bit of maybe a It's a Wonderful Life classic at the Belmont Filmhouse. But this year it was like, okay, the Belmont's going to be closed, what can I go see? Oh, I could go see Wonder Woman. I'm not too excited about it, but it's a rare chance to see a new blockbuster on the big screen, and it's been getting some positive reviews. I will put the money down to get the ticket. But unfortunately, lockdown kicked in, and I had to stay here in Edinburgh where we didn't have any open cinemas, but Aberdeen did for only a brief window. So I was one of those things, I was like, you know what, I will still make the effort to watch on Christmas Day, get the old VPN booted up, do a bit of backdoor wiggling and maybe watch it as a sort of Christmas movie. So that was kind of my excitement for Wonder Woman, was new film, new content, good reviews. I'm sure I'm not going to be that blown away by it, but I'm excited for something new to watch. What about for yourself? You saw it in a much more different way.
I did indeed. I was lucky enough to get to see it on the big screen in a huge 2-day theatrical window in Aberdeen, where they basically had tickets on sale, but it was coming out on Wednesday the 16th of December, and Aberdeen went into level 3 lockdown, which meant cinemas had to close on Friday the 18th of December. So I went along Wednesday night and was able to view it on the big screen. I blame the press, quite frankly, because I think it was pretty much within minutes of them sort of coming out of the press screenings at the IMAX, basically, I think it was Boris Johnson was saying that London was going to go into full lockdown, and then some other areas of England were going to lockdown, which basically decimated the amount of screens that Wonder Woman was going to open on, which basically meant that their decision to give us an early Christmas treat spectacularly backfired on them in terms of a UK box office result. And yeah, it was interesting. There's a lot of discourse going on about Wonder Woman at the moment. There is the positive reviews versus negative reviews discourse. There is the box office results discourse, all about HBO Max versus cinemas, and then there is something else which we'll get onto a little bit later on. But I mean, looking at the sort of positive and negative reviews, you were enticed by the positive reviews that came out initially when it was finally released on HBO Max in Christmas in the US. The rest of the reviews kind of took a slightly more negative turn, and Warner Brothers were accused of basically cherry picking the critics that were going to get to review it in advance to make sure that it was certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, which it no longer is. But I had a theory that the positive reviews basically, certainly in the UK, people seem to be very sort of much more positive on it than they did in America, because they got to view it at the IMAX on a big screen. And I wonder if some of the goodwill and good naturedness towards the film came from the fact that people were just excited to be in the cinema again. I know that I was, I think, possibly slightly more positive on it than you were, but I think so. Did you watch it on HBO Max in the end with a VPN?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, technically it's not even out really in the UK to view on PO.
Of course, yes.
Video
Well,
on
that is
demand.
another aspect of it, that basically everyone in the UK is pretty much annoyed that everyone in the US has completely spoiled Wonder Woman by putting up memes, GIFs, entire scenes up on Twitter and stuff like that, when they still have, at this time of recording, at least another week before they're actually going to be able to rent the movie on PVOD. So there's that whole theatrical window thing again coming out. But yeah, I mean, I guess you probably saw it just around about as the buzz started to turn slightly sour.
To be honest, no, I was still in a bubble really at that time. So I think it dropped at sort of lunchtime, East Coast time. So it was that kind of nice time of the evening where I'd sort of had to spend Christmas Day kind of on my own. So I'd had like a really late Christmas dinner, I think about maybe 4 or 5 o'clock, just sat down, enjoyed it. I watched the Peep Show Christmas special, and then I was like, right, oh, that's up now. So I kind of got started, really quite quickly into it. So the bubble I went into was Wonder Woman was all good, really positive message. It was the film that we needed more than ever right now. So there was no sort of taint on it really when I went into it, but it seemed that a lot of people sort of, some people kind of through maybe VPNs or what is likely to be happening in the UK, torrenting, which is anyone really surprised that was always going to happen? I'm sure Warner Brothers probably had that built in their kind of projections, but that's kind of what happened. It seemed that sort of the America and here all just lined up at once to sort of start watching it. And yeah, when I was watching it, I was like, again, I think you make the point, it's easy to be impressed by a film in the cinema. Even some films that don't like, I've gone in and watched and went, oh wow, that was really quite good, or that was better than the last one, which I liked quite a bit. And then once you kind of get home and you think about it, it's easy to sort of go, that wasn't so good. I mean, I started watching the film in the living room, on a full belly, my phone's pinging with people sending Christmas messages, or people just kind of reaching out, etc. You have sort of terrible weather on, you kind of pause it to go to the toilet because you've had too much wine with your Christmas dinner. All these sorts of things that you don't usually get impacting sort of the cinema experience. All went in. Like, I mean, I started watching it on my TV before navigating to, I mean, it's a 2.5 hour film, probably almost just shy of 2 hours of it. I ended up watching on my laptop, sort of in my bed, just getting comfortable. That is not the ideal situation to watch any type of movie in. Yeah, maybe a new Netflix binge TV show, but not a big sort of $200 million movie. So, I would still like to have seen Wonder Woman even after the film in the sort of cinema. And it's the same with a lot of different things. It's same with a lot of the Netflix films. We're lucky here in Scotland, we do get opportunities to see them, but the amount of times I sit there thinking, you know what, I would have loved that in a cinema, and I come away from watching Wonder Woman going, I wish I could have seen that in the cinema, and I hope cinemas open again soon when it's safe to do so.
I could just wonder what it's like, because I think I have a similar issue. Like what you're saying is that watching a film at home, there is, I guess, not really the temptation, but there is always the possibility of distractions there, whether it is your phone or a cat or something like that. That just basically takes your attention away from the screen, even if it's just for a couple of seconds. But that's what I love about the cinema, is that you're there. I certainly have my phone off during the film and stuff like that, so I'm just paying attention to the movie. And then, yeah, I guess some of that you could do have perhaps not 3D glasses, but certainly rose tinted glasses when watching a film on the big screen, because it was the first one that I watched on the big screen since probably, what was it, in August time, I think, was when they shut again. So I'd seen like Tenet and Unhinged and maybe Rocky 4, I think, in my first return to the cinema, and then of course it all closed again. And then, so this was my chance to see it. So I was just grateful for the opportunity to see something on the big screen. So therefore, I was perhaps slightly more forgiving. Although certainly looking back at my review, I certainly had several issues with it, which I guess we're going to go into. But the film has issues of its own in terms of box office at the moment, where apparently, we just heard that it had a 67% drop off at the US box office. They were making such a big deal about the fact that it did better than Tenet in its opening weekend. I mean, I'm assuming that more cinemas were probably open at that point, so it wasn't that difficult to have a better opening weekend in the US than it did at Tenet. But it has slightly imploded since it is now on HBO Max, and will probably end up with a final run of between 35 and 40 million dollars, compared to Tenet got $53 million in the US. And Tenet, for all the issues it did have, apparently did actually really rather well, all things considered, of course, if you look at the international box office. And I don't think it's done that well in the international box office anywhere else as well, because it isn't out in some places and you've only got PVOD. So, I mean, I'm thinking that, also this issue with the UK not getting it in time, so therefore it's been spoiled. Will we have to look at a new sort of theatrical model where it has to be day and date worldwide almost? And given the fact that, essentially everyone who wanted to see it in the cinema in the US saw it on the opening weekend, and then basically everyone's just stayed at home after that. Are we looking at a theatrical window which normally would have been at least sort of like 6-8 weeks here in the UK, or even 12? Are we looking at a situation where you're probably now looking at a limited window of maybe 2 to 3 weeks where people will go see it on the big screen, but then sort of switching to PVOD in terms of exclusivity? What do you think?
It's one of those things. I think a shortened window is probably eventually going to happen. But I think the problem is that the HBO Max model is just not the way to go at the moment. I think we've all seen that. I mean, I have sympathy for people that are excited about Wonder Woman and are following the rules, whether that's VPNs or, avoiding torrenting, that are just sitting there going, I will pay the £15-20 to watch it safely from the comfort of my home. It's essentially, as you say, it gets spoiled. There's entire scenes up there. You could put together that film so easily. I mean, if you are going to go video on demand in America, then you've just got to do it completely worldwide now. That's the reality. I mean, you only have to look at things like Star Trek Lower Decks, for example. For some reason, unlike, say, something like Star Trek Discovery and Picard, which were like day after drops, so it kind of kills the momentum for piracy and so on. You just have to hold out 20 hours and you can watch 8 a.m. the next day in the UK. Here a month is a long time on the internet. If you are a website that's maybe struggling for clicks and numbers, you will naturally want to review Wonder Woman 1984, because a month later your 3-star, 5-star review of a film isn't going to get as much attention as the beginning of something like that. If you are a comic book fan, a lot of them find a community online talking about DC, Marvel, etc. They want to be involved in something like that. The internet makes everything local. If you want to watch Wonder Woman within 2 hours of it being uploaded to HBO Max and you don't want to pay, can't VPN, can't do this, you can get it easily. That's the reality. So they need to find a way to boost their profits, but also to make sure that fans feel involved as well. And it's not a case of entitlement, but it's a case really of, that's what it is, for better or worse, and how do we get people all involved?
Yeah, I think the issue is it's not even really an issue, because Warner Brothers have the rights to distribute Wonder Woman or any other DC movies worldwide. It's not like a smaller movie which has different distributors depending on which country has bought the rights to it. Disney can release the MCU all over the world at the same time. It's not an issue. They will still get all the money for it. You're not dealing with different distributors, different exhibitors and stuff like that. So it's less of a problem with these big studio blockbuster movies than it is with, say, like an A24 movie, where A24 have the rights in America, but Studio Canal have it in the UK. Someone else, say Pathé, have got it in France or something like that. That's more of an issue. So you've got to, but with something like this, it should be easy enough to drop it day and date. It's. I think there will be. I think it'll be very interesting to see the PVOD numbers in the UK for Wonder Woman, because, like you say, there's the grey area, perhaps, shall we say, of a VPN, which is like, technically, if you're paying your money to subscribe to HBO Max, then technically you're not. You're still giving money for that content, so that's fine. But it's a slightly more of a grey area. But it's certainly not, just finding a torrented download of the movie and ripping it off. So that's good. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the numbers on that, because Disney Plus are also sort of trialing formats of, I know Soul dropped on Disney Plus exclusive, but that was free compared to their experiment with Mulan, which had dropped, and I think it was like end of August, beginning of September, but you had to pay about $20 on top of your Disney Plus subscription, and then it ran for like 3 months, and then it dropped down for free within your content. So, I mean, I don't think that one did as well as they thought either, but it is the way of the world, and I think there's going to be some sort of meeting in the middle ground between everyone to provide cinemas, a reason to book films in, to get people in, because there will still be people who want to watch it on the big screen if it is safe enough to do so, and there will be people who are happy enough to watch it at home, and it's finding that sort of easy middle ground. But the movie itself, in order to get people out, has to be good and exciting, and I guess we can now talk about that now. I mean, what did you make of the 80s setting of the movie? And I found it interesting that someone pointed out that basically it was called Wonder Woman 1984 and sort of abbreviated to WW84 to avoid the fact that if it had been called Wonder Woman 2, it would have been abbreviated to WW2, and that would have called up all sorts of different expectations, I'm sure, imagine.
In terms of the 80s kind of setting, it was all kind of pretty superficial, but I mean, that's kind of to be expected with a lot of these period piece kind of superhero movies. I did think it worked quite well for sort of the character of Maxwell Lord, that, they really whack over your head that he is basically an avatar for someone like kind of Donald Trump, and the rise of excess in the 80s. Greed is good, the breeding ground for your Gordon Geckos on film, and in real life kind of Donald Trump. I thought that was quite clever and a really good idea, but I wasn't really bothered about some of the issues I saw with some people were going, oh, they didn't lean into the music of the time or this or that. I thought there was definitely some interesting kind of elements that, it may not have been used particularly well, but I thought overall the idea to use it in 1984 and potentially use a character like Maxwell Lord was pretty inspired.
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually appreciated the fact that it didn't go over the top with its referencing of, having action scenes or other moments soundtrack to specific 80s songs, or having like Kristen Wiig like talking to Diana Price and asking if she wanted to go and see Ghostbusters, at the cinema later on or something like that, because it's, I guess, even though it is set in 1984, those kind of references would have, I think, dated the film even more. So I like the fact it was just using it as a jumping off point. And one of the main reasons, I guess, behind the change in settings moving forward from the 40s to the 80s was to see how, actually, the interesting fact that Diana hasn't really moved on. But you then get the comedy factor of Steve Trevor coming back, and him sort of, she's had this gradual move, 40s, she's lived all that time, but he's just dropped straight into it, and it's that sort of fish out of water sort of thing. I mean, what did you make of the return of Steve Trevor, and more specifically the method of his return?
So basically, when I was watching the first film, and I think I said on here at the time, and I felt it was very sacrilegious to say about a female-led superhero movie that the male character was the most appealing and interesting kind of character in it.
You sexist buffoon.
Yeah, like I'm naturally inclined. He's the best Chris, in my opinion.
So you're
that's
biased. You're biased.
I mean, that could be an episode in itself. Who is the battle of the Chris's? It's ultimately going to be between him and Evans, but Pine for the Star Trek fan kind of reigns supreme. And I thought he was the most interesting thing about it. And I remembered sort of like when he was announced that he was coming back, I was like, how did they bring him back? Like I could never kind of grasp that. And then I saw it spoiled, or I kind of went out of my way and saw it. When sort of it had been screened in America, like a critic put it up and went, this is laughably how they bring him back. And I was like, okay, it's a comic book movie. Fair enough. That sounds mental. But okay. Yeah, the way they bring him back, I remember thinking it was really odd at first, because I never quite realized, again, sort of because I was easily distracted, that, oh, he's literally inhabiting another person's body. It felt really, really bizarre. And then sort of, as I was kind of, again, distracted, I remember sort of just having a wee scroll through Twitter as I was watching the movie, and I noticed someone put up that went, did Wonder Woman just rape a guy? And it was that when I started clicking, going, holy hell, like, that is pretty problematic. And yeah, I think she did sexually assault this poor guy. And it really feels bizarre, because they didn't have to bring him back where he was possessing someone. Like, you've got this paw, surely you could just say, okay, magical wish, Steve Trevor comes back, and he doesn't have to be in someone else's body. I don't know why they made that creative decision. Truly baffling. What did you make of it? Because it seems to be one of the big discourse points of, like, yeah, was Steve Trevor quote unquote sexually assaulted?
I will get onto that in a minute. But I think, yeah, it was like, I think I wrote in my review of it that where is it? Because I mean, it's a comic book movie. No one ever really dies in these things. Certainly in the Marvel universe is very symptomatic of, somebody dies, but there's a way to bring them back. But in terms of the method of it, I mean, this was really like reaching. This was like really almost like laughable stuff. I said it's a doozy even by comic book standards. And yeah, essentially the Deus Ex Machina of his return is a dreamstone, and she makes a wish that Steve was back in her life. And yeah, the method of that was, yes, that someone else's body was taken over by the spirit of Steve Trevor. I mean, I thought when we saw his sort of like compass watch sort of jiggling on the shelf, I thought it was going to be like, it was going to suddenly, you were going to see his hand growing out of it, and it was going to use like DNA from him left over from the watch to then grow a brand new Steve or something like that. Again, would that have been more ridiculous? I don't know. But yeah, no, it did lead to some. I actually didn't sort of think about it at the time. It was only once I saw this stuff on the internet that I was like, Oh, right. Yeah, no, I can see that sort of thing, that with the consent issue with this man who is no control over his body. And I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, like, if you think about source code or whatever, it's like where Jake Gyllenhaal essentially in the end takes over the body of someone in a parallel universe. It's like, is that guy spirit trapped in the body and is just like almost like a being John Malkovich, and he's aware of what's going on, but he can't do anything to stop it. I mean, that's like a horror movie or something in itself. But I think, yeah, it wasn't until afterwards that I started reading up on this. I was like, oh, this actually sounds very much like Superman 2 for me, and I think more specifically the Donner cut of Superman 2, because in that film, Lois and Clark, Superman reveals his true identity. They are intimate together in the Fortress of Solitude, but at the end of the film, he erases her memory. Fair enough, okay, so that essentially, she doesn't know anything about it. But then, skip forward to, I think it was about 2006, to Superman Returns, where it turns out that she has had a child, and that child is actually Superman's. Now, that should raise the question of, once it's revealed that it's Superman's child, she would then be thinking, but hang on, I've never had sex with Superman, so how did that happen? That raises up some slightly rapey questions there. So it's like, is it along with that? I know that I think Patty Jenkins tried to justify it on Twitter, that if you're upset by that, then you should really sort of go back and look at Big, where essentially a woman has sex with Tom Hanks, but is basically Tom Hanks has the mentality of a 12-year-old boy, so therefore that's slightly dodgy. I mean, it's been dodgy ever since the 80s. It's just, obviously these days people look at it back now and go, ooh, not sure if you can do that. And certainly you would not be doing that. And that's why a plot line along that lines was not in 13 Going on 30, starring Jennifer Garner, I'm pretty sure. So yes, it was very dodgy. And I think there was potentially other avenues in which you could bring Steve back. I mean, it's a comic. You could just make anything up. But somehow they managed to choose a method which pretty much the majority of the internet found ridiculous, and then awkwardly quite troublesome. So, Steve Returns. I mean, what did you make of Chris Pine's performance in this? I mean, it was one of my sort of favorite aspects of it. I mean, his childish innocence and earnestness, sort of embracing that everything the 80s had to offer, was a bit of a high point for me.
Yeah, it was one of those ones that was slightly ruined by the trailer. I mean, I didn't think it had the greatest marketing campaign, but I liked that little moment of him sort of being, what about this? What about the bum bag? Oh, that's just a bin. I thought like they'd captured all sort of the little good bits in that kind of period of time. And yeah, even things like, oh my God, I'm in a plane and I'm sitting there thinking, like, you were like in World War One. You were like, you died in a plane. It shouldn't be that kind of exciting and so on. I mean, it was fine. It was kind of peaked a little bit in the trailer, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you can say what you want about the marketing campaign. I guess, in terms of the marketing department, they must have been tearing their hair out at having to rebrand marketing campaigns, 3 or 4 times. But I mean, I don't know if you ever could have done it, but I think something like keeping Chris Pine's, appearance secret would have been a fantastic thing to find out when you're at the cinema or at home. I mean, The Mandalorian is an example of a TV show where they have managed to keep secrets up until the point of release. Baby Yoda, or Grogu, as his technical name is, was kept secret until it came out, and then season 2 managed to keep a big cameo appearance in the final episode. If you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but they kept that secret until basically about 2 minutes once the episode had aired, and then everyone had to go and spoil it for everyone else on Twitter, because that's what people do. So it is possible to keep a secret. So I would have liked to do that, but I guess with all these candid set photos and stuff like that, it's much more difficult to. You could never, especially with the bum bag and stuff, you never could have just said Chris Pine was just popping on set to say hello to some friends. So it's a shame, but it is the way of the world. But in the 80s, you touched on it there. One of the big two villains of the piece is Maxwell Lord, like you say, in all other words, Trump. They go from the Nazis to fighting Trump. It makes sense. And he's this flashy, over the top sort of TV celebrity, oil tycoon, but in real life he's a crook and he's bankrupt. So of course it's going to be Trump. He's even got his sort of art of the deal style motto. Life is good, but it can be better. This movie was okay, but it certainly could have been a lot better. And what did you make of Pedro Pascal's performance in this? Because I'm interested to get your take on it, because you have not watched The Mandalorian, have you?
No, but being in lockdown, I will definitely be aiming to do it soon. That's the plan. I mean, he had a pretty good Christmas, really, didn't he? He had like The Mandalorian. What was it, like We Can Be Heroes on the same day on was that Netflix? And then obviously Wonder Woman 1984. Like, he is like the Kemp Powers. I mean, Kemp Powers was a staff writer on Star Trek Discovery who on Christmas Day had the One Night in Miami and Soul come out on the same day. Like, he had never been involved in any other movie until that moment. Like, he had a bumper Christmas Day, and so did Pedro Pascal. I kind of feel, my feeling is, and this probably be as edgy as I get with the discourse, is that I think Maxwell Lord seemed to be a thing that most people seem to agree on was like a high point in a pretty terrible movie. I think a lot of people are giving him a free pass because they really like him as a person and in The Mandalorian, because I found Maxwell Lord truly insufferable for 2.5 hours. Like, yeah, there was some okay moments, but like, yeah, here we go, he's repeating the same thing again. Like, I like that he is really campy and he seems to get the tone of the film better than even the writer and director, I think, get the film. But I thought it just became truly tedious after a while. It reminded me almost of, I'm not a fan of it, but like Batman Forever, like very similar into kind of the Riddler, for example, just that high camp, supervillain. Like, that can be interesting for a younger audience, but for me, I just find that truly insufferable, and I don't think anyone wants to slag him off because they like him, is my feeling. That's the only fake stuff I think critics are doing.
No, I was interested in your opinion from not having seen The Mandalorian. What your take on him would be. I think you're right. I think he is the one who gets it the most and sort of goes for that sort of maniacal, almost sort of mustache twirling 80s style villain, and he gives it everything in this movie. And I think he is interesting. But I think the problem is that, and I don't think they reshot the ending. Well, they certainly didn't. I mean, it locked out in the one ending, which is set at a Christmas market. They ended up, coming out at Christmas again. But I don't know how that scene would have played if it had been released in like May or August or something. It just would have been a bit weird. But the ending of his arc was interesting in that I'm going to go into. I don't want to go into spoilers here, but let's just say his comeuppance is not really as strong as it could have been. And I was wondering if that was almost down to the fact that since the movie was due to come out, say, last year in December, before the first series of The Mandalorian came out, I was wondering, because he is so popular now, that and such a good father figure that in those shows, that if they change the ending to reflect that, because certainly comeuppance in terms of the villains and stuff there doesn't seem to be much in this one, and almost sort of like it's kind of forgotten and brushed under the carpet, and in terms of a sort of light fluffy ending, which I was a bit weird, but I thought he was good. But yes, 2.5 hours, that's one thing about this movie. It did not need to be 2.5 hours. There was no way. I think a 2-hour runtime would have been fine. There was no need for that. And what did you make of the other villain, Kristen Wiig, who had more of a slow burn in terms of her transformation from the best friend to arch enemy?
They really did it dirty on that character, didn't they? Like, it, for like the first half of that film, it feels like it's going somewhere, and then it just kind of vanishes off. Really, I just found it to be such an odd, villain. She was really I thought she was discarded, really, in terms of as the film kind of went on. It's one of those things, like, the film didn't need to be 2.5 hours. It didn't need two villains. I think that I'd read sort of Warner Brothers were like to Patty Jenkins, like, you only need one thing to start the film, either the whatever takes place in the Amazon or whatever it is for where Diana comes from. I can either have that or the mall scene. And she was like, no, I want to. And, all power to her. But, like, there was so many bits where, like, even, like, characters, choices like it would. This feels like a very easy film to go through with a red pen and edit down. And I think that's the problem with a lot of blockbusters is like this 2.5 hours long. Yeah, you can justify that for maybe like an Avengers Endgame or a Dark Knight Rises, for example, something that's wrapping up a franchise or years in the making. No one needs a 2.5 hour Wonder Woman. Like, I think of myself, if I was a little kid, I would be loving to see this film in the cinema. But I could imagine being a young kid, and just getting like antsy in my seat, fidgeting. But if they made like a 90-minute, 2 hour Wonder Woman, I'd have been like, great film, want to see it again. I need to go rent it from Blockbuster. I want to own the VHS. Like, when I think of this, would I rewatch Wonder Woman? It would be a really tough ask to watch a 2.5 hour version of this film. Even some bad films, I'm quite happy to watch if it's kind of a shorter runtime, just because it's like easy to sort of sit with and reflect on the film and look at where it went right, went wrong. But this film is just, it's too stuffed, and sadly, kind of the cheetah character is one of them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the issue with the cheetah character and where she gains her power from is because it comes from the same item as sort of Steve Trevor and Pedro Pascal's powers come from. It comes from the Dreamstone. So when essentially the Dreamstone is sort of destroyed or renounced at the end, it means that her powers are taken away. Whereas I think she would have been someone who you would have seen like the early stage of a turn, but would have been like maybe the main villain in Wonder Woman 3 or something like that. I think it would have been that kind of thing. I mean, as much as I love The Dark Knight, I think the Two-Face sort of thing was maybe slightly rushed at the end, and we were robbed of having Two-Face as a full villain in a feature film. So I think it was that kind of thing. It was kind of very rushed at the end, and the CGI at the end was, I mean, given that they essentially had an extra year where they could have tinkered with that CGI, I think some of the CGI in this film was shockingly bad. I don't know how it was on the small screen, but even on the big screen, there was several moments. Basically, whenever Wonder Woman is sort of kind of floating and sort of landing on the ground and stuff like that, as she makes a big jump or something, there was some really dodgy sort of stuff in there. And I completely agree with you about the overstuffedness of the film. I think you could have taken that entire section set in Egypt out. I don't think it really served any real purpose. You could have done something similar in the US and just kept it there. I mean, the sort of truck chase, particularly with the point where she's sort of underneath the trucks and stuff, it just seemed to be like, hey, we really like the truck chase, the Cairo truck chase in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Let's just do something similar for Wonder Woman, I thought. And I think, yeah, it could have been completely excised, and you could have saved like a good sort of 20 minutes, and then you would have been around to about sort of 2:10, given that there was probably 8 to 10 minutes of end credits. You would have been about 2 hours, and then you could have left the cinema once after the mid credits thing, I thought. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
I agree with that. Like, and as you say, this was meant to come out when like the Rise of Skywalker came out. Like, could you like, what have they been doing for that year? Like, I know it can be easy. Like, I know with the new James Bond movie, for example, they said like, oh, it's wrapped, it's good to go. We're not going to use this extended time. That was when they maybe only thought they were going to have a few months wait. But like, surely like in that year, the amount of times there would have been different looks on it, from whether it's Warner Brothers, DC, Patty Jenkins, the editor. I've said it for a long, long time now. It feels like blockbusters have just completely lost the run of, giving an editor much to do apart from assembling a cut. It seems that they find it really difficult to kill their babies. At worst, you could do a Wonder Woman in 1984 where it's like the Lord of the Rings movies, where you go, here's, maybe it's a healthy runtime, but I think you'll get a lot of it. And you know what? Here's your incentive to go onto Blu-ray or HBO Max or whatever, a more extended cut with these sorts of scenes in it. It doesn't all have to go into this one and only cut. You can do a director's cut if you really, really want to. And you can make lots of money off the back of it too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, it's like blockbusters are getting too long. I mean, that's another potential episode for a podcast, isn't it? Just to, what is the ideal running time for a blockbuster? You don't need all that sort of stuff. And I suspect with the fact that the blockbusters are no longer going to be guaranteed billions and stuff like that, they're going to have to rein in the expenses and stuff. So you're going to have to have I think at the end of, I don't think we're going to see many sort of 2.5 hour long blockbusters in the future. I think they're going to have a leaner run time with less sort of big set pieces relying heavily on CGI and stuff like that. But I mean, there was one other moment which sort of stuck out slightly like a sore thumb. I mean, perhaps to general audiences they maybe didn't notice it, but to film fans like yourself and myself, it probably was a bit odd, and that was when you have Hans Zimmer providing the score for the movie, and then in a sequence where apparently Wonder Woman can fly now. Of course she can. I don't know if that's something that she does in the comics or not. I mean, apparently she has an invisible jet, so why do you need to fly if you've got an invisible jet as well? But yeah, during that sequence, I was like, "Is that?" And I'm like, "No, it isn't." And then I was like, "No, that definitely is John Murphy's Adagio for Sunshine from Danny Boyle's Sunshine." I mean, did you catch that? And what did you make of the fact that someone had clearly used it as a temp track, and Hans Zimmer went, "I can't do better. Just keep it in there."
Yeah, I was the same. Like I love the movie Sunshine and that score. I mean, I think Kick-Ass used it as well, and
Yeah.
it used it relatively well. I mean, I really love Hans Zimmer. I've seen him, various times live. I've traveled down to London on several occasions to see him live. I know people are raving about his score here, but like none of it really stood out for me. Like I love the Wonder Woman theme from the original one. It is an absolute banger. But like with this one, I was like, but I thought this was meant to be an amazing Hans Zimmer score, and like there's nothing particularly new, that's added to it, and there was nothing that kind of stood out. But like I love that piece of classical music, and fair enough that they want to use it, but I think it's a cheat in a movie like this to use that type of thing. It's not a soundtrack film where you can kind of get away with that. It's like, no, it features a score composed by Hans Zimmer. Like it should nearly all be his work.
Yeah, no, I think maybe for like newcomers or whatever they wouldn't have noticed, but I think there'll be a lot of people going, "Hang on," and then it's like, I mean, clearly it's such a good track that Hans Zimmer went, "Well, I can't do anything better, so we'll just keep it in." But it is odd, and I think, yeah, I thought that was one of the missed opportunities of this film, as well as there wasn't enough of that um, Wonder Woman score with the sort of the electric cello, her classic sort of theme, which I think was first introduced in Batman v Superman. I think, yeah, there was almost, it seemed to be more about Diana and less Wonder Woman. I mean, she's still, apart from like the opening really in the mall, she's still reticent to fully embrace her role as Wonder Woman, sort of staying in the shadows and stuff like that. But I guess that is where the sort of why Patty Jenkins wanted to keep the thing in the original opening with the sort of Amazonian contest where she sort of cheats to win, and it's like, no, you have to learn how to do things right, and the truth is important, and it's only then when you accept the truth that you will become a true hero, and that's where it sort of ties into the ending. So it does come full circle, but it does take a very long time to get there, and I guess, I mean, if we do see a Wonder Woman 3, which apparently has now been announced, even though box office wise it maybe doesn't justify it, but I mean they've got a plan, I guess, and they're going to stick to it. Maybe if it's an HBO Max release, actually no, Patty Jenkins said she'd only do it if it was guaranteed a theatrical run, so we will see it in cinemas eventually.
Well, DC,
but she's
if you check out, we've got a hip new show on the Nerd Party News. If you didn't catch obviously the news, you can always kind of find it in the podcast, where DC are planning to do 4 movies a year in the cinema going from 2022. So obviously I think aiming for sort of like the Batman movie and Flash, etc. So yeah, I know you mentioned there, DC sticking to a plan and that they're going to go with it. They're not necessarily well known for doing that, but yeah, I think they were saying that they're going to do 4 movies a year in the cinema and 2 maybe on HBO Max, which are going to be the quote-unquote less family-friendly movies. And one of them, I think Lance made a great point, is one of them is a black superhero, and yeah, that's not exactly the best look in the world, where you think, oh, it's going to be a less family-friendly movie, and dumping on HBO Max. So yeah, I would highly recommend people check out that podcast. It's a really good one for news.
Yeah, no, and I mean, Black Panther showed that, yeah, people will want black superheroes and will go to cinema to see them. And I know that was one of the criticisms of Soul dropping directly on Disney Plus, but this was the first Pixar movie with a black lead character, so people were wanting to experience that in the cinema. But strange times, the times we live in, means that we're left with this. But in terms of the future of Wonder Woman, where would you like the next Wonder Woman film to be set? Will it be set? Will it have caught up to date and will sort of join her post Justice League, or what decade would you want to see her set in?
Yeah, so obviously we kind of meet her in the late 2000s. Well, but 2015. Time has lost all meaning. I think probably you want to just go current day really now or something like that with the film and so on. Have a big adventure or something like that. Ultimately, where I want to see it is in cinemas, because no matter what I think of this film and so on, more films by women need to be showcased in cinemas. I mean, last year I think there was an article that dropped or something like that, where it was a record year for women in film. It was like 16% of features were directed by women, which is a record. That's still pretty damning, but we need to have these kind of films in cinemas and provide pathways for people. So that's where I ultimately want to see Wonder Woman 3 is in the cinemas, and giving Patty Jenkins that choice.
Yeah, I mean, actually rather bizarrely, but I mean, we could have had a bumper year for women directing superheroes, because we'd started off the year with Cathy Yan doing Birds of Prey and ended it with Patty Jenkins doing Wonder Woman. So DC's entire content was directed by women, but we nearly had, if we'd had the two Marvel movies that we were meant to have out, we would have had Kate Shortland doing Black Widow and Chloe Zhao doing The Eternals. So we would have had the four main, MCU and DCEU films all being directed by women. And I don't think people either realize that, just because everything sort of got moved around and stuff like that, but that would have been a huge statement to make, that basically having all those sort of female lead characters in these movies, but also all directed by women. So we've still got Black Widow and Eternals. What format we see them in or where we see them, we don't know, but hopefully, like you say, it is in the cinemas. I think the Mulan experiment failed, so I think we must see Black Widow in the cinemas. Whether it shifts to November again, we shall see. But in the meantime, we'll just have to speculate and go on the internet to find out what the plans are for Wonder Woman in the DCEU. But in the meantime, we'll be back in a couple of weeks talking about films, and perhaps even looking forward to what we expect to potentially see in 2021. We'll have to check our calendars, find out what's moved in the couple of 2 weeks, but hopefully there will be something to watch in the cinemas, and we'll let you know what we're looking forward to then. But in the meantime, stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.